Hey, hi everybody, how are you? Ooh, watch your ears. That wasn't a very good response. Hi everybody, how are you? That's almost frighteningly enthusiastic. That was too much. That was too much. You're either hot or cold, aren't you? I'm Ryan Van Winkle. I'm very happy to be chairing this event. I guess one of the last events of the festival. What a fantastic festival it's been. Thank you so much for not going into the love podium, the love theater. Because what we're going to do is a lot more exciting. It's going to be a raw text. And there'll be Q&As afterwards, sir. Yes. Why are you asking me this? What, you would leave? You would leave if it wasn't?
Yeah, it wasn't. Then if it's something new, I would like to go.
Oh, okay.
But if it's repetition, then I'll stay here.
I thought I told you to tell your uncle to stay in the car.
Just the same. I'll stay here.
Oh, we're so lucky. Thank you. Okay, let's be serious now. This is poetry, everybody. This is a serious event. Okay. We're here to launch this very exciting book, Text, by our friend Sudeep Sen. He's a poet from India, and an excellent and acclaimed poet from India. He's got two new books out, this one and Fractals, which will be available behind you, and he'll be happy to sign them after the performance. Just a little bit about Sudeep before we start. He's written numerous collections, including these two. He's the editor of a literary magazine in India called Atlas. He was the first ever poet in residence at the Scottish Poetry Library, where I also happen to work. He's visited many, many countries and written a lot of poems about them as well. He's been a visiting scholar at Harvard. He's been translated into 25 languages. He's done a lot of things. I could spend an hour reading his biography, but I think you'd probably prefer to hear some poems, correct? Yes, that is the right answer. That is the right answer. You can tell it's the last event because I don't care anymore. No, we're gonna have a really lovely night. I'm really happy to be here. Just before we start, I just want to say thanks to everybody at the Lahore Literary Festival, especially the very, very hard-working volunteers who have been so incredibly hospitable to us all. It's been a fantastic time, and it's a real honor to be here on the final event. Let's show our love and appreciation of poetry to Sudeep by giving him a gigantic round of applause.
So good evening, Assalamu alaikum, namaskar. It's my first time in Pakistan, and I've been here for about 5 days, and I feel actually as if I'm at home. Seriously, I actually crossed the border by foot, and even though I'm born many years after the partition, it was an emotional experience because we had property on both sides of the border, like we did East and West Bengal. We shouldn't have been carved out, but unfortunately we were. But our souls are the same, and I think hopefully today's poems are going to reflect some of that. It's a poem I'm going to start at Kargil. This country and my country, for some silly reasons, not because of us, but for the powers that be, fought last time. The last war was in Kargil. Everybody knows the context, so I'm not going to repeat it. And the poem opens with an epigram from this excellent poet who I hugely admire, Derek Walcott. And the epigraph is from his book-length poem called Teopolo's Hound. And the backstory as to why I went to Kargil was at the time I had a young son, and I do a lot of trekking and rafting, and I was doing this entire trip around Ladakh and exploring the Himalayas. Kargil was not on my original itinerary, but my young son, who was playing with plastic guns and toy cars, said, "Baba, let's just go there. There may be sort of bullets and guns we can find." Of course, I took him there. It was an ordinary town, 10 years after the war. Life carried on, but at least as a poet, a poem happened. Opens with Walcott. Our street of smoke and fences, gutters gorged with weed and reeking, scorching iron grooves of rusted galvanize, a dialect forged from burning asphalt, and a sky that moves with thunderhead cumuli, grumbling with rain. 10 years on, I came searching for war signs of the past, expecting remnants, magazine debris, unexploded shells, shrapnels that mark bomb wounds. I came looking for ghosts, people past, skeletons charred, abandoned brick, wood cement that once housed them. I could only find whispers, whispers among the clamor of a small town outpost in full throttle, everyday chores sketching outward signs of normalcy and life. In that bustle, I spot war lines of a decade ago, though the storylines are kept buried, wrapped in old newsprint. There's order amid uneasiness, the muezzins cry, the monks chant, baritones merging in their separateness. At the bus station, black coughs of exhaust smoke screen everything. The roads meet, and after the crossroad ritual diverge, skating along the undotted lines of control. A porous garland with cracked beads adorns Tiger Hill. Beyond the mountains are dark memories, and beyond them, no one knows. And beyond them, no one wants to know. Even the flight of birds that wing over their crests don't know which feathers to down. Chameleon-like, they fly, tracing perfect parabolas. I look up and calculate their exact arc and find instead a flawed theorem. One of the things I want to do is dedicate this reading tonight to my brothers and sisters in Pakistan, of course. I'm here, I'm your guest. But also to two people who died recently. We're losing too many good writers. Umberto Eco died, I think yesterday or day before yesterday, and so did Harper Lee. So I'm going to read a poem called Ma, which is mother. And I lost my mother a few years ago. And the problem is the kind of countries we live in, India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Sri Lanka, are very similar in many, many ways. After my mother died, it took me about 10 days before I could actually get her body out of the morgue, because our bureaucratic setup is such that you have to sign forms in triplicate, pay bills and so on. So rather than going through a process of grieving, all I was doing was running around municipal offices. So this poem comes out of that. Ma, mother. As if in a dream, you disappeared unannounced, untimely, and unprepared. The handwritten diary you left behind weepingly revealed your sordid, searing pain. Grief-struck, I run around cities' municipal offices, rummaging through bureaucratic files, seeking your death certificate for validation, as if losing you wasn't loss enough. So since winter is slowly creeping in to Lahore, I thought we should have more winter, make it really cold. So I'm going to read a poem which basically describes Delhi winter, but it's not terribly dissimilar from here. Of course, poets are strange creatures. Topic of the poem is winter, but it's all over the place. It's all about, see what it is. Winter. Couched on crimson cushions, pink bleeds gold, and red spills into one's heart. Broad leather keeps time, calibrating different R's in different zones, unaware of the grammar that makes sense. Only random woofs and snows of two distant dogs on a very cold night clears fog that is unresolved. New plants wait for new heat to grow, to mature. An old cane recliner contains poetry for peace, woven text keeping comfort in place. But it is this impatience of want that keeps equations unsolved. Heavy, translucent, vaporous, split red by mother tongues, winter's breath is pink. Thank you, you're very, very kind. The next poem is titled Banyan, and banyan is a tree which everybody is familiar with. And in my ancestral home, both in Bangladesh and in Pakistan, we had these large banyan trees, and I've got old sepia-tinged photographs and torn black and white photographs of those. So I feel I should colonize them and plant my own banyan tree in my little patch of a plot in Delhi. Of course, the only space I have to plant my banyan tree is 2 inches by 2 inches, so I planted a tulsi plant, which for me is the banyan tree. But this is for the great tree and many other things. Banyan. As winter's secrets melt with the purple sun, what is revealed is electric. Notes tune unknown scales, syntax alters tongues, terracotta melts white, banyan ribbons into armatures as branch roots twist, melting soil in a circle. Circuits glazed under cloth carry alphabets for a calligrapher's nib, italicized in invisible ink, letters never posted, cartographer's map uncharted. As phrases fold, so do they. I'm very, very keen on dance. I'm flat-footed myself. I can't dance to save my life, but I really, really enjoy watching dance on stage. Particularly classical dance, classical Indian dance, and Western modern dance and jazz dance. And my mother was a dancer, but not a professional dancer. She was a dancer in school, then she became a housewife and got a PhD in philosophy and psychology, but didn't, and still remained a housewife. She was at a time, and she regrets it because my women friends are out there, and she said, "Oh, I wish I did all that sort of stuff." Anyway, so this is, I'm writing a book called The Whispering Anklet, which is basically the anklet you wear around your ankles. Not ghumru. What is it called in Hindi? Payal. Movie. So this one is called Bharatanatyam dance, which is one of the great classical dances of India. And I wrote this poem under a very peculiar kind of circumstances. When you're looking at the stage, you're actually seeing the X and the Y axis, the height and the width of the stage. And we imagined the Z axis, which is the depth of the stage. I thought, wouldn't it be interesting if I was the lights boy and see the rehearsal of the dancer and actually see that whole dance from up above and thermal map each of her footprints and see what kind of patterning she makes. So I did that for three days, this particular dancer. And the most amazing thing that happened was when I was looking at the photographs, the patterning she made on the stage was exactly the same as the tal and the bol she was dancing to. Ta dhin ta tai thai ta, ta dhin ta tai thai ta, ta dhin ta tai thai ta. So then I told myself, wouldn't it be interesting to recreate that rhyme scheme into Indian poetry? So this poem is formally, it's quite formal. It has A, B, A, C, C, A, B, A, C, C, A, B, A, C, C is the rhyme scheme. Anyway, all this is not very important because it's all erudition and so on. What really happened was I saw this woman on the stage. She was gorgeously beautiful. I fell flat on my face and fell in love. She was a lot older than me. Many, many years later, I showed the poem to her with some trepidation. I propose to too many women, so I keep my options open. I'm happy. Bharatanatyam dancer for Leela Sampson. You must have seen Leela Sampson on stage. She's one of our jewels of India. Spaces in the electric air divide themselves in circular rhythms as the slender grace of your arms and bell-tied ankles describe a geometric topography, real, cosmic, one that once reverberated continually in the prescribed courtyard of an ancient temple in South India. As your eyelids flit and flirt and match the subtle abhinay in a flutter of eyelashes, the pupils create an unusual focus. Sight, only ciliary muscles blessed and cloaked in celestial kajal could possibly enact. The raw brightness of Kanjivaram silk, of your breath, and the nobility of antique silver adorns you and your dance, reminding us of the treasure chest that is only half exposed, disclosed just enough, barely. For art, in its purest form, never reveals all. Even after the arc lights have long faded, the audience now invisible stayed over. Here I can still see your pirouettes, frozen as time-lapse exposures. Feel the murmuring shadow of an accompanist's intricate rag in this theater of darkness. A darkness where oblique memories of my quiet Kalakshetra days filter, matching your very own of another time. Where darkness itself is sleeping light, light that merges, reshapes, and ignites, dancing delicately in the half-light. But it is the sacred darkness that endures, melting light with desire, desire that simmers and sparks the radiance of your quiet femininity, as the female dancer now illuminates everything visible, clear, poetic, passionate, and ice pure. So my poems tend to be very serious, so if you want jokes and laughter, this is the time to clear your throat. But I have tried writing funny poems. They're really, really difficult. Scots do it very well. My friends from Scotland, the Irish poets do it very well. So this one is called Grammar, and this is really taking the piss out of my colleagues who are academics, some of very nice people. But they talk in a language which I mostly don't understand. I've read the book, then I go and listen to a paper, and it's talking about something that has nothing to do with the book at all, with many, many polysyllabic words. Sometimes I wonder why they have to do it, because they are only talking to 3 other people in the room, if at all. So this is called Grammar, meant for all my friends who are very, very fine academics with multiple PhDs. It has an epigraph from this excellent Aboriginal poet from Australia, Melinda Bobbis, and the first 3 lines go, "She has no English, her lips round in a moan, calligraphy of veins. 31. My syntax tightly wrought, I struggle to let go of its formality, of my wishbone desiring juice, its deep marrow, muscle, and skin. The sentence finally pronounced, I'm greedy for long drawn-out vowels, for consonants that desire lust, tissue, gray cells. I'm hungry for love, for pleasure, for flight, for a story essaying endlessly in words. A comma decides to preposition a full stop. Ellipses pause to reflect. A phrase decides not to reveal her thoughts after all. Ellipses and semicolons are strange bedfellows. Calligraphy of veins and words require ink, the ink of breath, of blood. Corpuscles speeding faster than the loop of serifs, an unresolved story of our lives in a fast train without terminals. I long only for italicized ellipses. My English is the other. The other is really English. She has no English. Her lips round in a moan, oval, rich, nuanced, grammar-drenched, etched letters of glass. So I was wondering whether to read some of the erotic stuff. I was told that I might be, by the time I cross the Wagah, well, this guy is very, very excited. Yeah? He wants to know my personal life already. I just hope my head and the body go to the same country. So this is one of the reasons when I took up this challenge. You know, we come from a country, from a civilization which revered and celebrated erotic art. Khajuraho, Konark temples in India, the sculptures you found in Mohenjo-daro, Iran and Iraq in the Mesopotamian civilization. If you look back those times, it was celebrated as something which was pure and pristine, the beloved. You have it in Sufi poetry and so on. Here we are in 2016, and I don't know why people have become so regressive. So I said, yes, even in the Mughal art. So I just took it upon a challenge. What does a young poet, a modern Indian poet do with it? So I thought I'll write a sequence of erotic pieces.
They have not become regressive in 2016.
It was actually regressive about 50 years ago. Yeah, that's right. Yeah. No, I'm just dating it. Yes.
They are now computers. They challenge your imagination even more.
Yes. This will challenge your imagination as well. Let me get to these. So the first one is called Desire. Actually, it's a sequence of 18 pieces, and the wonderful thing that happened was a friend of mine who was a ballet dancer who lives in New York, she took about eight of these pieces and made this beautiful production using these pieces as a backdrop, as a text base. And all she used in the performance was white chiffon, white leotards, white flowers, and white candles. It was just the most stunning piece of dance production I've ever seen. And it's all understated erotica, which is really what erotica should really be. This one's called Desire. Under the soft, translucent linen, the ridges around your nipples harden at the thought of my tongue. You, lying inverted like the letter C, arch yourself deliberately, wanting the warm press of my lips. It's wet to coat the skin that is bristling, burning, breaking into sweats of desire, sweet juices of imagination. But in fact, I haven't even touched you. At least, not yet. Thank you. This is a very local poem. We just had this for our lunch. Gajar ka halwa. It's called Indian Dessert. And this is, I have to admit, written from a bachelor's point of view. It's a recipe poem. So if you follow this poem very, very carefully in your kitchen, you'll get a cracking bowl of gajar ka halwa. So do follow it in private. Indian Dessert. Clumps of wet smoke simmer in the pan and slowly lift to caress the outline of your breasts as you cook, stirring spices in carrot, milk, and cream. Ingredients that conjure recipes of hunger and passion. As you melt sugar and butter and gently stroke flakes of grated almond, more clumps of perfumes permeate through the silk of your shirt, now transparent in heat, painting the outer circle of the nipples to an hardened edge, tasting the sweet skin, the surface of the crinkled base, a creamed mouthful of untampered delicacy. This is about botany. It also alludes to actually the famous film by Orson Welles, Citizen Kane, where the central image is the rosebud, if you remember. But it's really about botany. It's still part of the erotica section somehow. It's called Climax. Lips of a rosebud open to let the dew drop in. More botany. Sort of talks about pollination of the plants. It's called Release. The stamen raises its head, bursting to shed pollen. Relief rain showers the parched folds of pink skin. I think I'll move swiftly away because I can see people looking down like this. I think you're enjoying it. I can see the sort of latent.
You're enjoying it, and you're, control because you just, you don't want to show this.
You don't want to see them. Yeah, I don't want to see your feelings. Yeah, not in public. These are elegant things you do with a woman or man you love in private. Can we have the discussion after the reading? That'd be lovely. How am I doing? Yeah. Maybe right at the end, the last 3 minutes, I just top it off with a poem. This one is called Offering. And it's really an offering of friendship. I've made a lot of really, really lovely friends here in the last 5 days. It's been incredible. We use a word in bad Indian English called I'm fully fed up. I've eaten so much. And you tell the host, if it's a direct translation from Punjabi or Hindi, fully fed up. And it sounds so rude in English. Anyway, this is Offering. The kindness of libation, lyric, and blood. Her endless notes left for me, little secrets, graces, trills recorded on blue and purple parchment to be lipped, tasted, devoured. Only the essence remains, its stickiness, its juice, its memory. Seamless juxtaposition, the brute and the passion, dry of the bone and wet of the sea, coarseness of the page and smooth of the lips iridium. I try and trace a line, a very long line. The ink blots as this line's linear edge dissolves and frays like capillary threads gone mad, twirling in the deep heat of the tropics. Threads unraveling, each sinew tense with the want of moisture and the other's flesh. There are no endings here, only beginnings. Precious incipients, translucent drops of sweat perched precariously on a collarbone, waiting to slide, roll unannounced into the gullies that yearn to soak in the rain. Heartbeats shift the shape of globules as they alter their balance and color, changing their very point of gravity, constantly deceiving the other. I stand wanting more of the bone's dry edge, the infinite blur of desire, the dream, the wet, the salt, the ink, and the underside of her skin.
That was-
Yeah, let's go for it.
Is that on? Yeah. Let's just start with the book that you're releasing and launching today. We've got two books here that we've been that Sudeep has been reading from: Fractals, which is new and selected poems, and the new one, Erotext. And I want to know more about where first I just want to know how you begin writing such a book. Does it start with one poem that you think, hey, that's not bad, all right, let's do some more of that, let's see what happens, until it grows into a collection? Or do you know that you want to do it and you think, okay, we need to write some erotic poems, some sensual poems? And also, it's very difficult to write sensually, and I think you pull it off, and it's about that control, the control of the feelings, and you not tipping that line too far into, you can easily go into pornography, you can easily go into romantic, Mills and Boone kind of bottom
Yeah, if you
stripping.
push it too much, you can tip over to the P place, pornography. If you undercook it, it's like bad love poetry, which we've all written in high school and college. So how do you skate on that thin line is very, very crucial. And that demands control. I mean, I work a lot with form and structure. My gurus in poetry are people like Faiz Ahmad Faiz and Iqbal and Rabindranath Tagore and Milton and so on, who wrote very, very formal poetry, but at the same time, they were beautifully lyrical, at the same time, incredibly controlled, but at the same time, anybody could sort of relate to it. These are poems you could learn by heart. That's the way I grew up. We used to learn our poems by heart. And poetry actually seeps through your body in that sort of sense. I didn't choose poetry, it chose me. The problem is I was growing up as any well-meaning middle class, upper middle class man in India. If you say that you want to pursue English literature, two things happen. Not quite now, but say 10, 15 years ago. Either you're so bad that you couldn't get into any of the fancy subjects like economics and physics and all that, so the last place is English lit, or you are gay. And what happens if you're normal? Want to pursue literature? So I had to sit for the IIT exams and the MBA exams, got in there, and then I told my editor, saying, it's only 3 years, let me just see what happens, and that's how it happens. So how do books happen?
How did these poems find you?
So some books, it actually is much more organic. What happens, you write for a long time, and then I see clusters of islands forming. It's sort of almost amoebic or protoplasmic, and I can see this one has a particular DNA, the other group of poems have a particular kind of architecture. All of them are quite disparate. You can either put them all in one book with different sections, or if you want to build on it, you can make them into full books. So with Erotext, it's being sold as fiction, by the way, because the publishers like to make money. Nobody wants to publish poetry. So I remember the publisher saying that we love the writing, we would like to do something with it, but please tell us it's not poetry. So I said, I'm at the point in my life, it doesn't really matter. However you want to do this, if you like the writing, that's good enough for me. So it ostensibly looks like prose text because Gotto Kavita or Gadya Kavita is basically prose poems, and which is a long, it's a huge tradition of sub-genre of poetry. So I had enough of those, and I sort of kind of saw that they're coming together. And then I wrote some new ones to see how they fit in, and all these sort of architectures reveal themselves to you as you're putting your manuscript together. I'm still very analog, so even though I type on the computer and do my editing on the computer, I print out everything and then arrange all the pages on the floor. So there's one room or the drawing room, I just take over people's drawing rooms. Dining table is the biggest table one has in a room. So I actually move papers around and renumber them by hand and see what happens. And it's quite a tactile and organic thing, because depending on how you arrange the poems, the fluidity and the texture and the tonal quality changes completely. So yeah, different books happen in a different way. Since there's lots of Scottish people here, we have the Scottish who do two really wonderful sessions. I've spent a lot of time in Scotland, and there's a book I wrote called The Distracted Geographies, an archipelago of intent. The entire book is one poem. It takes place over 206 pages. The whole idea behind the book was not only Scotland as the landscape and what was happening, it was informing me in terms of the terrain and the topography, but the two ruling shadows behind the book was the human vertebra, the spinal cord, and Pablo Neruda's odes, his elegies, which are long and thin, much like the country he comes from, which is Chile. So if you photocopy Chile, it looks actually like the human vertebra. So why 206 pages? Because there are 206 bones in the human body. The book has 33 chapters because there are 33 vertebrae in the spinal cord, and it's all sorts of mathematics and physics. Those things are not important, but it's great fun. If a scientist wants to go and dig deep into it, he has some fun spaces to.
I'm glad you mentioned both prose poetry and these kind of very thin poems. You've got both of those types of poems in this book. And what struck me about the ones that are in prose, and I wonder how you feel, like it's such a breathless form, because you don't get that line break. I take it you didn't write these as poems and then convert them into prose as thin poems and then convert them into prose poetry on a whim, or at all. You probably couldn't even write it. You have to write them with those long, breathless lines, don't you?
No, it's so gratifying to talk to a knowledgeable poet. It's just, you ask all the right questions. I mean, imagine being interviewed by someone who just doesn't get it, which is like really painful. Why do you write? You write with a pencil or a pen?
That's my next question.
Anyway, so yes, I can explain every line break. There is a reason why you break lines. Because a line break is almost like an invisible semicolon or a comma, or breath pauses are grammatical icons in poetry.
So like, I just want to say, so people couldn't see it, but like in the poem Climax you read, there's a lot of semicolons, there's a lot of breath, right?
It's a heaving poem.
Yeah, there's a lot of breath. Whereas the other ones are, like the other prose poems, they're just cruising.
Yeah, skate along very quickly. So when I was telling you about the Scottish book, that has a very scientific architecture, but then of course it's a poet it was an ode to Pablo Neruda, basically. An ode to my unteam hours in biology classes, which I didn't particularly enjoy, but somewhere it helped my poetry.
I want to ask a little bit about, in this book, you've got 5 parts, all Ds. One of them is delusion. I wondered if you would speak a little bit about the notion of delusion within erotic and sensualness, and within love, the notion of delusion. I mean, I think it's seen in some of the poems you heard, such as the one about the dancer that you haven't touched yet, right?
Delusion and fantasy are such, we just don't want to recognize it in a medical sense, delusion. Because all poets, I think, poetry by nature, I think it's a mental disease. I think I need to go to a psychiatrist, but I write poetry, so I suppose in some senses, but delusion and fantasy are spaces which are at the same time very exact, but also inexact. By which I mean, if you take the solar system and the rays that happen, the wonderful space of penumbra where there's half light is much more interesting than sheer sunlight or total darkness. Why? Because we as human beings are really flawed creatures. As long as we recognize we are flawed, it makes it much more interesting. In Milton's Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, who's the most attractive character? Everybody must have different things. To me, Satan is the rocking fellow. He's like, he really like takes the lead. God pales in comparison. So that's why it's a great space to work with. You know, it's an abstract space to work with, but you can also make it as abstract or as exact as you can.
I love this idea of poetry as a disease. You are, and maybe this is just because I've been reading the selected and the new and selected works, but it seems like your output is incredibly, you're prolific. Would you say that?
Yeah, I think I write poetry before my parents met, so it was a bit of a problem. I mean, I've been a problem child all along. So somewhere along the line, I think that it just happened. You see, the thing is, well, it sounds prolific. Most of my friends are novelists. Most of my friends are non-fiction writers and fiction writers. I see them working really hard. They get up in the morning, different people have different routines, but they get up in the morning, get to their desk, from 9 o'clock to 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, they produce so many thousand words, so many hundred words every day as a diligent practitioner of it. It does not happen that way. I'm sorry to sort of disillusion you and delude you to that. Sometimes accidentally you can get a poem like that, but often it's hard work, so you sit down and you write. So for me, since I'm so badly brought up, I don't believe in any one religion. Either I believe in all or none. I eat red meat, I love it. I don't like to exercise because there's enough cerebral exercise I'm doing. I have all the bad habits going. So even in hell, they'll find a difficult spot to get my space. So the only place I pray and do meditate is poetry. I sit down with poetry for 2 hours every day, regardless of what happens. Those 2 hours need not even be continuous. It could be an hour in the morning, hour in the evening, or half an hour. Anyway, I mean, even during the festival, I'll just go off and just be with poetry. It's not that I write a new poem. I was reading Ryan's book. I was reading Dark Horse, which Jerry gave me this afternoon. So I'm reading other people's poetry. I'm engaged in other people's poetry. I really enjoy reading other people's poetry. Most poets actually don't read others. They love their own work too much, and they love themselves so much. They just don't think that others exist.
Well, that's the thing. If you're reading a book, even if it's a really bad book, it's still, I find it still clicks some part of my brain where I'm like, oh, I can write something now, which I wouldn't have ever done if I wasn't reading something. If I was just on my phone or chatting to a friend, I wouldn't have thought I could write a poem. But if I'm reading a book of poetry, it'll spark. I'll see a line or a beginning or a turn in a poem.
Absolutely.
And I'll just want to run with it and do my own
See,
thing.
the thing is, the other art forms for me actually inspire me a lot. So as I was saying, classical dance I gave an example through poetry. Classical music and rock music and jazz and blues. These are various areas of music I like. So when I'm hearing music, for instance, something triggers off and I'll go and write a phrase or a love song, whatever it is, and that may actually come and spark a poem later on. The whole subgenre of poetry called ekphrastic verse, which is poetry that is written in response to art. I've just extended that to dance and film and music and so on.
You seem to take in your work throughout your career. It seems like you take things in and you seem to really be in the world, and you write about place so well and you describe things so beautifully but yet crisp and clear. It seems very important to your work that we're there with you, right?
No, I think it's very important because when you decide to publish a poem in a public forum, be it a magazine or in book form, people are actually buying the book and paying some money, hard-earned money to buy the book. It's my responsibility as a writer to do my best. It may not be perfect, but I must try and do my best. So for me, those 2 hours are basically like going to the gym, poetry gym. I have to keep at it, you know. Even Sachin Tendulkar, when he was at his peak of powers, he would have net practice for 2 hours, just throwing balls at him and he would bat. Bradman did that, Don Bradman did that. Shoaib Akhtar relentlessly just bowled and bowled and bowled because he was clocking 150 at a time when not too many bowlers from the subcontinent were. So you just have to put in those hard graft. And when I say all this, this doesn't mean that all the beautiful romance and the wonderful sort of deluded spaces we were talking about doesn't exist. All that helps you to write and create a poem. But once you have that lump of clay in front of you, you need the chisel to chisel it into a sculptural shape. And that's training. I mean, that's practice. It may not be training. Sometimes it comes to you, but after a while you just have to practice. I mean, otherwise, it'll be out of steam.
And editing.
I don't throw it away. I keep it with myself, but I would put it out in public. I don't put it in book. I'm very, very careful about that. And I actually try and get 3 or 4 friends of mine who I actually trust to read my manuscripts, so that I want a third and a fourth and a fifth eye to see whether it's actually working together. Because we get very close to our work, and there are times I don't even know that the comma should be there. And my best editors are editors who tell me that maybe the comma should shift by 2 M spaces. It's that minute. If you think of a music mixing board like that, you have these millions of buttons. One side is the bass, the other side is the treble, then you have the mid-range. It's the graphic equalizer, how you actually make the sine graphs and the cosine graphs that makes the musicality of a poem. So exactness is very, very important. Though, at the same time, I want the reader to just read the poem and not really worry about any of it, because it actually should look simple enough.
Don't think about it.
Don't think about it, because it should just come to you, and it should touch your heart and your head, ideally both. But as a writer, I think, I want the discipline for it to be constructed properly.
Should we take a few questions from the audience? Because we have maybe 8 minutes or something. Anyone else? Anyone else? No, should we let them talk? Should we let them ask? Do you want to have this mic?
Thank you. It seems a contradiction in terms saying prose poetry. I mean, it's being, why people are being so lazy? I mean, if you want to write poetry, just write poetry. If you want to write prose, just write prose. I mean, how prose poetry, what is this? I mean, to me, it's such a meaningless thing. I'm sorry to say this, but either it has to be prose or it has to be poetry.
So you haven't, well, what can I say to a silly question like this? It's really, really banal. I'm sorry to say this, but there is a huge tradition of what is called prose poetry. If you have read literature, if you follow poetry, then you will see that it is not like prose. It is not like regular fiction. It can be called, the closest it comes to is flash fiction or microfiction. It's a very strict genre. A wonderful writer, like a contemporary writer like Adam Phillips, for instance, he wrote this book called Monogamy. I think it's published by Faber and Faber. Brilliant, 3 lines, 4 lines, a whole story gets told. But you cannot write that. You see, you have to allow the words to win rather than the writer winning, because the words on the page are much, much more important, and you have to give them a lot of respect. And the words tell you what it's going to be. It's almost like divine intervention. You just have to trust the words, trust the readers. You don't impose on them, because it's a sacred, a white page is a sacred space. If you revere it like a Sufi music or a dargah as a prayer, then you don't have that kind of control. So forms, it emerges. We were talking, Ryan and I were talking, some groups of poems take place in a particular way, the others shape themselves in different ways, and then you play with it. Because the basic initial embryonic structure gets given to you. You get a prescription, and then you play with it. Anybody else?
Just South Asian Indian poetry
Yeah.
in India.
Yeah.
And how do you look at the tradition, and where do you think you are in terms of maybe adding to it or deleting from it? And, how do you?
So 2 years ago, I edited a book called the HarperCollins Book of English Poetry by Indians. And it was quite an open, it was the first anthology which was very wide-ranging. So there were poets not only from India, but also from the wider diasporas. So there are English poets, there are American poets, there are poets from Fiji, South Africa, East Africa. You know, I was really trying to map how, because passports mean nothing and people talk about identity and gender and so on, but really, when you look at someone's writing, you see the resonances describe your culture. So if the poem's written by even an American citizen who happens to be of Indian origin, it's, you know, if it fits into this fabric, it's part of South Asian poetry or Indian poetry in English. So that's a big fat book. It's available easily. It's, you know, it's a door stopper. Even if you don't like it, it's good for kabaddi. You know, you get good money back. I also, in the introduction of that book, I provocatively said that the best of poetry written in English is far superior than the average fiction that's coming out. And that's borne out to be true in the last 3-4 years, if you just see the kinds of poetry that's coming out. It's a really, really exciting time. There's a huge resurgence of poetry, not just written poetry, there's slam poetry, there's performance poetry, there's a wide variety of things, really good stuff that's happening. And in some ways, the borders of have also melted. You know, there are a lot of international writers, poets who come and perform with Indian writers, and you know, there's a lot of commonality. At the same time, it's very distinct. The cultural indicators and the cultural registers are very distinct. But a lot of people are very, very well equipped with the formal quality, which is fantastic, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to know if, let's say, there are people here who want to publish their poetry.
Yeah.
What would you suggest for them? And you've obviously talked about how to go about organizing your manuscript, but what would be one of the few suggestions that you would give to upcoming poets?
So I just say 4 things. Just put it down in bullet points. Read, 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 read. A lot of poetry. Read other people's poetry. Okay? After that, that's one part. Second is read literary magazines that are publishing poetry. Every magazine is different because it has a different set of editors. They have their own kind of preferences to the kind of styles of poems they want to publish. Study the magazines, and if once you realize your poems kind of belong to this, then you start submitting it to them. Send them 3 or 5 poems unpublished. Don't send your whole manuscript. Send a short biography of only 5 lines, not your PhDs and all the medals you've won. You know, the poetry editor is only looking for the text, actually, a good poetry editor. If the poem blooms and it works, you know, they'll write back to you. But it's a endless task. You just have to keep doing, because nobody is as precious that people will come to your home, take your drawer out and say, please, please, let me publish your poetry. I mean, that may happen if you win the Nobel Prize. But you know, there are only very few people who win the Nobel Prize every year. How many? 1. And that too may not be a poet. So send out your work. But send out your work when you feel you've done your best. Because you know, a good editor also gives you feedback. And then when it comes to book publication, there's something very important in the poetry world, all the poets here will know. There's something called the acknowledgements page, which comes in the front. If the manuscript has been, 80% of the manuscript is published in good places, the editor of the publishing house already knows that it's been vetted by so many different editors that they will look at it very promisingly. You still may not get it published, but you have a good chance. So that's the simple process. It's just hard graft, unfortunately. The writing of the poems and falling in love and jogging and the beauty of the language and all that is beautiful, you know, but this end of it is just purely clerical. Send out and wait. And you can get a happily, you can have a rejection slip, you know, 1 pile, but it doesn't matter. Don't take it personally.
One more quick question, and then we'll have a last poem. Quick question and answer. Yep.
Hi, Sudeep. Just a quick question in regards to, you describe human beings as being flawed creatures, and said that poetry is a means of mental illness almost. My question
For me, yeah.
For you. My question is, do you feel as if your writing and your performance suffer, your writing and your poetry suffer when you feel a little bit more sane and not so mentally ill?
Very good question. So I'll tell you, it's changed over time. When I was younger, say in my teens, I went through the phase of the usual teens go through. Poets, alcohol is very closely allied to writing poetry, and you think you need to have a drink and you write poetry, you get stoned and all that. Well, maybe a good poem comes out. Usually a lot of crap comes out after that. You really have to be fairly clear-headed when you're writing poetry or any kind of writing. So that's one phase. You don't have to be ill. You have to be actually fairly fit to write properly, because you have to have your mental faculties around you. So the illness part is a completely irrelevant thing. If you have had certain kinds of illnesses, you can draw upon from the experience. So your stay in the hospital, you can fantasize about how the medication went through your arteries and it turned from white pill and it sort of mixed with the blood and it became pink and so on. You can do a lot of fantastical things there. And use facts for your poetry. I mean, everything I write, factually you can check it, you can fact check it, it'll all be, if it's about a particular process, it works. I mean, try the Gajar Kahalwa poem, you'll see, and call your girlfriend or boyfriend, and it'll really work. Cooking works with dating, yeah. Especially as a man, if you cook well, or try to, it works really well. But you don't have to be either drunk or stoned or ill to write good poetry. It's just a bad notion. You can, but that's each one to themselves, but you don't need to be.
Let's have one last. Oh,
Okay.
thanks for the questions, everybody. That was excellent.
So we share this. Hello. Yeah. So I was telling you earlier that the whole Himalayan range fascinates me, and our countries are very, very lucky. Nepal, India, and Pakistan, Afghanistan. We have the highest mountain ranges in the world. And this poem comes out of my many, many months of spending time in solitude. I spend a lot of time in monasteries just reading and writing, because there's no cell phone signal, nobody can WhatsApp you, and it's just stunningly beautiful, and you're there. You just need a piece of paper and pen. This one is called Prayer Flag, and you know what prayer flags are. It's in Buddhist religion. It's believed that if you take a particular piece of cloth and go and tie it on the string in a particular place, for mannat, it may bring you good wishes, or if you're yearning for something, it may be true. So this is set in Manas Sarovar Lake, the highest lake where many of the major rivers that come through Pakistan and India are born there, which is in Mount Kailash. And I'll end with this, and thank you for being so alert at the end of the day. It opens with a chant which you are all very familiar with. Om Mani Padme Hum. Oh, the jewel in the lotus. One, Manas Sarovar, Mount Kailash. Freight flapping in the high winds, prayer flags gently unravel. Homage to the day's first light. But today the dawn is not as bright, though heavy, brooding, silver gray like the lake's shimmering glass top. No one is here except for a woman staring far away, wrapped in the sanctity of continuous linen, her own sari like a prayer flag, though devoid of any color. She isn't mourning or crying, just gazing fixedly into the water's changing glimmer, as the sky's wet weight and the shore's rocky line meet, their edges meanderingly melting into the lake itself. I stood far behind her, behind everything she saw. She was only an accidental figure in the white screen frame. Unlike her, I was looking skywards through the prayer flag's translucent cotton, counting each thread of each piece of cloth that wove private stories whispered only to me. Weather-worn, strung across canted multiple horizons, I tried to map their own geographies, each an island, each with its own terrain, texture, inscription, and scripture. Found on the highest points on land, as close to the sky as is possible, these magic carpets, shapes caught on an unintentional clothesline, were more meaningful to me than this vast monastic scenery. How each flag, each one must have preserved secrets that only their owners knew. How each a talisman exuded safety and calm, shrouding away grief for the briefest while, when one forgets everything, real, imagined, and just dreams. My own piece of cloth that I had once tied onto this line wasn't visible to me now, but that did not matter. I found strength in this procession of private passion, in these flags' lack of starch or hierarchy. Their stories passed down by one flag to another, toggled hand in hand through time and age. Just like my pet yellow butterfly, who infused each flower in my garden with the gift of life, without any show or fad. I like the transparent quiet here. I also like the wind's occasional sound, its severe current tearing to the flag's heart, picking out the perfect pitch and melody. A memory now, a still, framed, not revealing to the world what I had once seen. The panorama's generosity, its wild, stark untouchability, how each story stitched and preserved like the jewel in the lotus, its crystal fine edges caressed by petals' soft skin, until everything falls inward like a fetus in a womb, a toppled, misplaced comma, my own implanted memory. And then they bloom, fanning outward, each flag, strand, story, each private grief and pleasure, chanting noiselessly in the mountains' silent winds. Thank you.
If you'd like to get a copy of Sudeep's books, there should be a stand in the back, and you'll sign them, won't you?
Yeah, happy to have you.
Thank you all very much for sticking around. Sorry we went a little bit late.
Thank you, Ryan, for conducting you well, and LLF and Razi for inviting us and hosting us.